Welcome to our weekly podcast for our intergenerational groups sharing stories. I am Kelly Kirksey, the Minister of Family Life.
And I'm Jeremiah Childers, Minister of Spiritual Formation.
We are so glad that you are joining us today. Jeremiah, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're talking about our ups and downs of life. And if we're honest, most of life is either on an up scale or a down scale. And moments in between happen. So today we're going to talk about some of the ways that we think about times in our life when we were truly happy, times in our life when we've been truly sad, and then times in life that we find disappointments. And I thought we would look today at probably a very well-known biblical text that's used a lot of times at funerals and even other places. It comes out of Ecclesiastes. So the book of Ecclesiastes is a book that is asking some big questions about life. What is the meaning of life? Why is it that some people do well in life and some people don't do well in life? And, why is it that you can have everything in life and feel still incomplete? And yet somebody that works a menial job can go home and feel much more complete than the person that lives in the palace.
It's like a midlife crisis in a book of the Bible.
Midlife crisis, that's...
I mean, these are the questions you ask,
Yes.
right? In the midlife. You've lived long enough to be like, gosh, this life is not fair. And I work so hard, and sometimes I don't get what I want. And sometimes other people, they don't work as hard, and they get more than me. Or, is this meaningful?
Yeah.
Why am I here? What is the purpose?
Part of the text, delves into why do bad people seem to get a good life?
Yeah.
And good people seem to suffer. So there's all of those kind of existential questions that midlife people do have.
I mean, everybody has those questions, but a lot of times when you get to midlife, that's when you start realizing I've lived a pretty significant portion of my life and I understand what's going on here, and I don't understand anything at all.
It feels that way. And especially during, we might talk a little bit, but during seasons where things are in upheaval.
Yeah.
Whether it's the economy, whether it's politics, whether it's in our personal lives with diagnosis or life transitions or different things like that. But our passage today comes out of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And as we read, think of kind of life as a whole. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times we think of life in where we're at, but think about from birth to death, everything that is filled in. And most of our lives, when we think about that, they are lived in many times in between extremes, but in extremes. So for everything there is a season, a time for everything under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones, time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So when you hear that passage, you've heard it over and over again. When you think about kind of these seasons of life, you think about the extreme of being born to the extreme of death, and everything's lived in between. When you hear this passage, what does it bring up in you?
Yeah, just sort of the reality of, I think a lot of times in life we think of life as this line. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly where that comes from. Maybe the fates and like mythology or something, sort of the string of life or something, but
I think it's more modernity that it happens where we think
where it's like a line.
It becomes more linear.
Okay. Yeah. But that truly life is a lot more circular than we think of. And so I think about, that all of these things, they go hand in hand, birth and death. I always think about when I was in seminary and my seminary professor passed away. And he passed away, I guess, in my
We were together.
Third year.
Yeah, in seminary.
Yeah, you were there. I know. I know. I remember. But it was my third year of seminary, and Will and I got married my first year, the fall of my very first semester of seminary. And we had Layla the summer before, or the summer before my third year. And he passed away in January. And so I brought Layla as an infant to his house to visit his widow. And he had died that morning.
Yeah.
And I just remember kind of how surreal it was to have this new life that he and I had talked about, because I was pregnant when I was taking classes with him.
And he would have been right about our age now.
Yeah, he was 40 when he passed away. And so I can remember him sharing stories about when his kids were born and when his wife and he had just gotten married and kind of parts of their story. And right after she was born, talking to him about how your view changes when you have a baby and all these things, and just how strange it was that I was sitting there at his house after he had passed, holding my baby, and at the same time, so sad.
Yeah.
And kind of the surrealness of that moment of just holding life and death, like in the exact same space. But then also how beautiful it was because everyone there wanted to hold her. Everyone there wanted to talk to her. Everyone there, obviously everybody loves a baby. And Layla was adorable. But it was sort of, I think, a really healthy thing for her to be there, even though it was strange. But for people to be able to sit in that space of grief and also see life right there. It was kind of a cool experience.
It reminds me of a song.
What?
Blood, Sweat, and Tears. They sang a song, When I Die.
Okay.
And it's like, when I die and I'm gone, there'll be one child born in this world to carry on.
Yeah.
And it's it's kind of a song that just says, after death, there's always life that continues. As Ecclesiastes kind of talks about these kind of extreme seasons of life, of birth and death, and we experience those regularly, but they seem to paint a bigger picture in our minds about life. He talks about, or the writer talks about, people in their just everyday lives, and if you read a little bit over and over it again, it'll say, happy are those that can enjoy themselves as long as they live. Moreover, it is a gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in their work. I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added, nothing can be taken away. God has done this so that all should stand in awe of him. And over again, this kind of image of, for those that can take pleasure in what they do from day to day, from the meals they eat to the time they spend with their family, that's really essentially the greatest treasures that we could have.
Right.
And part of it is, how do you embrace the present moment in the midst of these kind of big swings of life?
Right. These like polar opposites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for most of us, I think we struggle with some of that. How do we always try to remind, and I've said this, I think, in maybe a podcast before, but I try to remind myself, I try to remind Amber, I try to remind Lily, in our 3-family unit, is when things are good, let's enjoy it. Because something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Whether it was, Amber getting breast cancer, whether it was Lily being diagnosed with some eating disorder in the past, whether it was, somebody that dies in the family or a divorce that happens outside of but it affects us. Something's always going to come.
Right.
So when things are good, we should what? Enjoy them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't do that very well. We don't enjoy the moments that are good. When have you find yourself having to say, let me just remain in the present moment?
All the time. I am not a good present moment person. I am constantly planning ahead. I really like I love planning vacations. I love thinking about what's next. Will is a much more better in the moment person, and I'm very okay, well, who's riding with who when we leave here? Where are we going after this? What's going to happen here? Do we have a plan for tomorrow? Sort of always a thought like, okay, what's coming next? What's coming next? And so I think that that's something that I struggle with. But I do think it's also just part of like our society is always this pushing forward and the inability to just say, okay, right now is enough. Yeah. And I mean, we see that, I'm terrible about like taking pictures. But part of that is because I am trying to be in the moment. I sometimes wish that I took more, but being able to actually just experience what's happening. I remember we were in Spain for a little while. And while we were there, one of the things that just really hit me was this one coffee shop we went to. And we were talking one day and he was like, there's no way this guy is making any money off this coffee shop. Like, these coffees are inexpensive. You get a little ham sandwich with them. We're like, great deal. And so and his friend was with us who lives in Europe, and he was saying like, there is no way that he's making enough money to save up for retirement, really is what he was saying. And his friend was like, no, he's living it.
Yeah.
This is not, I'm going to live this and one day I'll live my dream. Yeah. He was saying, this is probably where he plans to spend the rest of his life, right here in this little shop. Yeah. And so he's living his retirement right now. And that like really hit me, and that like, that is not the way our world works. We work as hard as we can to save up money so that one day we can live the life we want to live, probably now, And so I think about that a lot, like how can I, in the world I live in, live in such a way that I am living the life I want to live now and not be dependent on, okay, well, one day I'll have worked hard enough to spend the last years of my life doing what I want to do, And I think that's kind of, what you're saying, like, this is the good time.
Yeah.
The good times are not coming one day. The good times are right now.
Right here. And we don't know what's in the future. One of the things I like about Ecclesiastes is that it does come from a different way of living than we have today. It comes from a much more agrarian society. And as we think about, kind of before our modern time, people lived in regular rhythm of life through the seasons. And every year was essentially the same as the year before, and the year after would be the same as this year, unless there were droughts, unless somebody died in the family. And for us, we always kind of see our life as there's one more step to take.
Yeah, it's sort of like always wanting to go.
Whether it's in school, you've got to go up to the next grade, graduate, go to college, or get a job, or go to the military, whatever it is, and then start a family, and then have children, save for college and retirement, retire, do the things you want to do, get old, die.
Right.
But in most of human history, it was this year will look like next year, and next year will look like. And sometimes I think in church we have to balance those two things. There's always got to be room for growth and innovation in ministry and mission. But we also, as a church, we follow the church calendar, not to an extreme that some churches do, but to make sure that we have those constant rhythms of Lent, Advent, of celebrating the Christian calendar, so that every year there is a cycle that we can see happening. And oftentimes, if we're careful, we'll look and say, our lives are playing out somewhat like that too. As we think about, as you talk in your groups, for the small groups, you'll be talking about times when you're truly happy, truly sad, truly disappointed. Can you think of a time in your life where one or all of those things happened at once?
Yeah, I think one of those times really was when what I talked about, when my professor in seminary passed away. I think, I have never been afraid of death. I had my grandfather died when I was young, and my aunt passed away from breast cancer when I was younger. And so it's never been really foreign to me. Yeah. It was just sort of a part of life. But I think the reality of someone who I was close to and was young and had young children and had plans for the future.
Yeah.
And I think there was definitely like a different feeling to that, and knowing like, okay, all of these things that were to be are not anymore. And it was really hard for me to kind of process that. And I was young and had just had Layla, and Will and I were newly married. You know, there was just like a lot of change that had happened all at one time. And then that happened. And so I just remember thinking what is the point of all of this, you know, and just really struggling. And it was funny because I remember thinking, you know, the mercy and the heartache of it is that the sun comes up the next morning, you know, and like that's a mercy because the world keeps going. Even when you're like so sad and you think, I want it to stop, like, no, like the sun comes up anew every day. Yeah. And there's a mercy in that because it keeps going. And there is like a struggle in that because it feels relentless. Yeah. And so, but yeah, I think for me, like that was one of those times where there was just a really strange depth of, I think it was just a lot of my own personal things that I was going through matched with, you know, we were pretty good friends, and I was friends with his wife and his kids. And so knowing like not knowing, but comprehending a little bit of the depth that their sadness was going to be. And, you know, their sons having to grow up without a dad and stuff like that. So that was a really hard moment for me. What about you?
One of the, you know, we share our story. For me, it was about 2 years after me and Amber got married. She came home one day. She had baked a cake to tell me that she was pregnant, and it was very sweet. And we started going to the doctor regularly, asking all the right questions. And she was home one day and started feeling bad, and we had a miscarriage early in the pregnancy, but it was long enough that we were already planning. Had already been buying things, getting things together. And it was one of those, you know, experiences where, you know, she has the miscarriage, and, you know, we had already been dreaming. You know, had already had dreams about the baby, had already come up with name. Had already, you know, done all the things that parents do in those moments. And it was both sad and disappointing at the same time. And part of it was because we found out later that we're different blood types, and part of her blood type, you thought the doctors would have asked these questions, but all she needed was a shot. But we found that out, and you know, it took us a little bit of time to want to try again, tried again, and Lily came. So out of the tragedy of losing one, we still were able to get a child. Every year, Amber works with pregnancy and infancy loss through the hospital, and she works with a group that does the Walk to Remember. Yeah. So about 2 weeks ago, it was this year's Walk to Remember in Greenville, and every year we have our baby's name called out. We named our baby, and it's for us to share that with those that are there. There were about 500, 600 people there. You hear all the babies' names that are called that either weren't born because of a miscarriage or were born and lost. And as sad as it is, it's also comforting knowing that all of these families have gone through it, and they're still here. They're still, in some ways, thriving. Some have had children or had children before. Some are still trying. And part of the seasons of life is that one of the things I always remember, anytime you have a winter season in life where things seem to die, there's always a possibility of spring. Yeah. And, you know, in the moment, you don't feel it. You know, I remember after the miscarriage, we took a few days off and went to Asheville and just cried away from everybody. But it's also something that, you know, has shaped and formed us. You know, having disappointment in life feels bad at the time, but it also makes you aware of what you're appreciative of in other moments. And it also makes you aware of life's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things we take for granted or we think that we deserve or we're supposed to be given because maybe we're followers of Jesus aren't necessarily true.
Right.
All of us, there's nobody that's immune to being hurt by life, and that's not even other people doing it to us. Nobody should think that they should escape getting sick or losing family members. And the Bible is fully aware of these kind of things.
Yeah.
It reminds us over and over again that, this is kind of the cycle of life. And we are just, as Ecclesiastes, oftentimes translated, life is but vanity of vanities or meaningless of meaningless. But one translation that I like is life is but a puff of breath, a puff of breath. All is but a puff of breath, which just means that it's short.
Yeah.
And because it's short, we should enjoy what we've got when we've got it. And not to enjoy it to hurt others as we do it so we can get what we want, but to enjoy it because it's a gift from God. And all of those seasons of life help us to grow, even the bad ones. What thoughts do you have for those that are maybe sharing their stories this week about ups and downs of life, Kelly?
I think that for me personally, this idea of, not that there's like two sides of this idea of, that there's a time for everything, right? The sort of the cyclical thing that I was talking about, that life is a lot more like a circle. Like for me, part of it, that terrifies me because I don't want to live in Groundhog's Day. I don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again. That sounds so monotonous. And I know for some people that's their dream. I get it. But for me, that's like a nightmare, it just sounds terrible. But, the other side of that is, when you're in these moments of like darkness, that they won't last forever. Yeah. And that when you're in these moments of happiness, you appreciate them more because they too won't last forever. And so you kind of are given permission to be like, okay, and you know what? Like I might, or a day, when you disappoint yourself, I did something wrong. Well, guess what? You're probably going to have a chance again, and you're going to have an opportunity to do it right. Maybe not specifically this exact same thing, but you'll have a chance again to make something right, and so kind of that idea of that it will come again, and there's something really beautiful about that, and hearing each other's stories, I think reminds us of, okay, this person survived this. Like I may be in the midst of it and it's so hard, but, I can look at someone who's 70, 80 years old and they too have experienced, the loss of loved ones or a miscarriage or, all of these things. And they're okay.
Yeah.
And, and there was happiness that came after that. And so I think that's something that's really neat to be able to listen to each other's stories and just walk through that together, knowing that like you won't be in that moment forever.
Yeah. I think one of the wonderful things, I think, at least in my experience in being in ministry, is that we are ministers to different age groups. And one of the things I hear over and over again from older people, especially looking at somebody my and your age that still has children at home, still working, is just the reminder, there are accomplishments to be done. There's always work to be done, but they're only home for a short time.
Yeah.
And to enjoy them while they're young. And I've taken that to heart, at least, in just my experience with Lily, hearing people over and over again in my life tell me, enjoy these moments because they won't last forever.
Right.
And, as we're in our intergenerational groups, it's good for some of the times the younger people to listen to the wisdom of those that are older, because it feels like there's so much pressure in the moment to achieve that test or do this or to do that. In reality, it is important, but sometimes there are more important things that are happening all around us. And if we're too focused on kind of that next thing, we miss what's right in front of us that we can't get back.
Right. And that there's not always a, like, okay, if I don't, like, Layla is going to college next year. I think a lot of people think, okay, well, I have to pick the right school.
Yeah.
If I don't go, or the right job, or the right next step, whatever that is, but if I don't do it right, it's going to mess up my whole life.
Yeah.
And as adults, we can look back and be like, listen, there are a lot of paths. And it's not so much about, you picking the exact right one. It's just living rightly there, and embracing God's call there. But there can be so much pressure and feeling like, okay, I have to do, there's only one road that I should be on. And if I don't get on it, it's going to mess it up.
And sometimes it's, the reverse of the older person telling a younger person to stay with their children more, spend more time intentionally with their children. The reverse can be said to somebody my age looking at maybe my daughter, but also your children, is you won't always have your grandparents.
Right.
Make some memories with them. Spend time with them now. Yes, you're busy. It doesn't, you think you always got more time with that person. And for us, it might be with our parents. Making sure that, don't take for granted the time you get, because it won't always be there. And something like Ecclesiastes helps us remind us to stay grounded in the moment and enjoy that which we have. And sometimes we can't enjoy what we have because we're always looking for that which we want in the future.
Yeah, or what we don't have right this minute.
Yeah.
Instead of just being okay with where we are.
So in your intergenerational groups, as you share these stories, listen to each other, but also reflect on, in your moment in life now, what are some areas you can enjoy, put some priorities back into that will add meaning and value to your life, that one day when you are on your deathbed and you're reflecting back over your life, you can say, I'm glad when I was such and such age, I took a step to say, let me put this thing over here and focus on this.
Yeah.
Because this added value to my life, whether it was spending time with family, whether it was getting more involved in the church, whatever it was, this has made my life more complete. Very rarely does somebody I've met on their deathbed talk about wishing they had worked more.
Oh, yeah. That's what my brother is a minister, and he always says, he was like, I've done tons of funerals.
Yeah.
And I have met people on their deathbed, not, but as they're processing, like, this is the end of my life. Yeah. And he's like, never, ever have I once had someone say, gosh, I just really wish I had worked harder.
Yeah.
I wish I had worked more. I wish I had spent more time in my office. It's just a reminder of things that are important.
On an aside, sorry, we're going to keep it just another minute. I was reading an article about people that are billionaires, which we don't have that problem.
No.
But not just them, but people that were super successful, and they were telling their workers that unless if you want to be a worker that works 40 hours a week and goes home and spends time with your family, that's great. But you won't be the top tier successful person if you do.
Right.
And the awareness is, for them, you have to sacrifice everything else for that goal.
Yeah. And
as great as that sounds to somebody in their 20s or 30s, later in life you might realize all the money in the world, even the good things you do in the world, maybe were not as important as that time that you could have had making a family, starting a family, being with family.
Yeah.
So
you're just loving the people around you.
People. And there are great things people can do with their lives, but over and over again, I'm reminded that nothing's more important than being a part of that community that is family, church, life. And there's a lot of things we put as priorities, but sometimes those things will leave us empty.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that you have a great time sharing stories. We look forward to talking with you next week. We've got a special guest next week, I believe.
Yes, so exciting.
So we'll have another person on our podcast. We look forward to hearing your stories in our small groups. Talk to you later. See you later. Bye.
Bye.